Hello, welcome back to Movie Remake Time, a Filmmaker's Compass podcast, where we look at sequels, remakes, and reboots and ask the very simple question, who did it better? I'm CP, this is my awesome co-host D-Man. D-Man, I hope you're thrilled about this movie. I'm actually psyched. I got to go see it in the theater. I don't know where you watched it, but I'm excited to talk about these two.
Well, of course I'm thrilled. As usual, the excitement hopefully should be palpable. I'm really excited. We do have two movies, one that actually hit theaters this week and is a soft kind of reboot slash sequel-ish. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll talk about it when we get to the story. I'm not sure exactly how it pans out. But this week we are taking a look at the brand new The Suicide Squad, which is kind of a soft reboot of 2016's Suicide Squad. So this one's directed by James Gunn, the other one by David Ayer. And is it Ayer or Ayers?
I thought it was Ayer. Sorry,
Ayer.
David.
Okay. Yeah, now that I think about it, I'm like, I can't remember. But what's really fascinating about this is they've kind of rebooted the cast. They're changing the tone slightly, but they kept a lot of the same elements. There's actually some people from the original cast that are returning, and there's a few elements that they're drawing heavily from the comics. So I want to throw it over to you. What are your first impressions here?
Well, it's really hard to talk about Suicide Squad and make a comparison unless we do acknowledge the missing Ayer cut out there. This has been a thing, quote unquote, on social media for the last year and a half. Once fans realized that the power of social media was enough to inspire Warner Brothers to release the Snyder Cut, they have been clamoring for the Ayer cut as well. So we need to go back, and if you're not familiar with the situation, what really happened? Okay. David Ayer created the Suicide Squad. Apparently, it was something very close to his heart. It was looking at these characters in much darker tone, more dramatic, more as tragic heroes, and kind of a real character study of this team of anti-heroes as they go out there and are forced to save the world, reckoning with their personal past. Mm-hmm. According to the original editor, it had a visual style and pacing very similar, in fact, to Black Hawk Down, which is the opposite of what we got.
Yeah.
After Warner Brothers released one of their preview trailers for the film, the audience loved it, and they said, "Hey, Ayer, we're kicking you aside, and we are recutting it with the trailer editors to release what came out in 2016, something that was kind of a blend of Deadpool meets Guardians of the Galaxy."
Yes, and I think it's worth noting, you brought up the trailer, and this is something that we should address. That trailer actually was a huge hit. It set the bar and expectations really high for the Suicide Squad, and I think people were really pumped for what we were going to get. And the expectations, we can go ahead and say it, they just weren't met. And when we're talking about David Ayer and this whole Ayer cut, it's worth acknowledging that Ayer himself came out probably in July of 2021, mm-hmm. where he actually addressed this very thing. So now we know the Ayer cut is not just this mythological thing that fans want, and they want this better version of a movie. Just like with Snyder, once it was formally addressed, we know it's real. There really is another cut of the movie out there that is some other form or some other vision that David Ayer had for the film. And now I don't know if the power of social media can move us to another, a Justice League style, recut of the original Suicide Squad. But for the sake of this discussion today, it's worth acknowledging that all we have is the theatrical cut. So we will be using that as our baseline to compare to this new The Suicide Squad. And that's kind of how we'll frame the discussion today. What do you think? We just don't have that footage.
We don't have it. And hopefully we will, because I would love to see it. It's been really wonderful that a couple of the big stars from the original Suicide Squad have come out in support of the release. WB's towing the typical WB line, which is it's never coming out. But they told us that about the Snyder Cut. So keep hashtagging release the Ayer cut. I do every day. And you should
There you go. Tweet it. But okay, when we look at these movies, we acknowledge right out the gate the kind of cultural impact of that first trailer of the original. So when you look at the trailer for the new one, what was fascinating to me was the first trailer that was released was kind of a behind the scenes type trailer that looked at Suicide Squad. And what they were really leaning into was that they had hired James Gunn and they wanted to highlight the new cast.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating because this is an ensemble cast, and they abandoned a majority of the cast, or at least maybe half of it from the first one. They kept, Amanda, they kept Flag, they kept
Harley Quinn,
and
Captain
there
Boomerang.
Captain Boomerang. There was a couple other mentions at the beginning, but they kind of go out the window really quick. A little bit reminiscent of the G.I. Joe.
Exactly.
Where they have what's his name, Hawk,
Duke.
And Duke. That's who it is. Yeah, not Hawk. Although Hawk didn't appear in the sequel. Yeah, Dennis Quaid. Sorry, Duke. Yeah, he ends up being in it for like the first 10 minutes, and then they just kind of like, whatever. We're moving on with this new cast. And that's kind of what they did here, with the exception of, like you said, those 3 kind of main characters.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to the cast, you look at it, what do you think? Which cast do you think did it better?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I think the James Gunn cast is in a lot of ways rooted in more of the Suicide Squad from the comic books, at least from more recent comic books. But I do think it's funny, and James Gunn acknowledged it himself. The character of Bloodshot was originally written in the screenplay as Deathstroke, and they were expecting Will Smith to,
Hey, I think we are messing up the names. It's Bloodsport and Deadshot. Right?
Did I just say that wrong? I probably did.
You did. You're gonna have to rewind it.
Wow,
oh man,
wow.
We are all over the place on names on this episode.
That's pretty bad.
Right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, Bloodshot is the Vin Diesel comic book movie, so you're right.
Okay.
It's Bloodsport.
Let's make sure while we move forward, we got the name. So Bloodsport and Deadshot. But what's ironic is they really are just like the same character. Like, different actor. They both have issues with their daughters. They're both extremely accurate and take offense to anyone that questions their ability to be accurate. And they're looking for sort of a kind of slight redemption arc. Can they kind of be the good guy? And so they really are pretty similar, right? They're not necessarily taking the cast then in a whole different direction. They've just kind of switched it up there. So Harley Quinn, I'll acknowledge, to me, if you like her take, Margot Robbie's take on Harley Quinn, then you're in luck. I kind of feel like the more I watch her, the less I like the take. Kind of not enjoying it. I don't know. How do you feel about her performance?
I mean, in both the Suicide Squad movies, she's better, I think, than the Birds of Prey movies. So we'll just say it's an upgrade.
Okay. And then there's, correct me if I'm wrong, there's King Shark, or what do they call him in this movie? They call him something.
No, it's King Shark.
I mean, forget it. I'm bad with names anyway. So King Shark, what stands out to me is the way he's used in this movie. He's essentially just a shark Hulk.
Yeah. Remember in the original one, they have Killer Croc. I think that at least with King Shark, he's there as a comedic element. Whereas the Killer Croc was kind of a wasted character, I felt, in the first one.
Well, at least, and I know, Killer Croc looks a certain way even in the comics, but I mean, at least King Shark looks like a shark. I mean, his look alone, right, is kind of funny. And then you got Sylvester Stallone kind of delivering these one-word answers, very much in the vein of Vin Diesel as Groot.
Yeah.
Or something, kind of just having fun with the voice. But I don't know. I mean, to me, he seems like, instead of Smash, it was Nom Nom.
Yeah.
Like they were, and then he was borderline indestructible, which I don't know why, he just is. Because he's still, I mean, I guess he's just, a living creature. So I don't know why bullets don't go through his skin or anything. They just don't.
Yeah.
But I mean, once you accept that fact, fine. Who cares? He's a walking shark with arms. Maybe
it's not like there's really, this amazing story and character arc behind him. He's kind of there as, as the Hulk, the Drax, the comedic character.
Yeah, and I don't know, like I thought Flag was fine. I like the way they used him in the new one a little bit more than the old one. In the old one, they were kind of hinting at some sort of relationship he had with the Enchantress, or at least the girl that was originally like Moon or whatever her name was.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I don't know, I think it played really well here. I liked his character arc where he was actually willing to stand up and kind of do the right thing. He was one of the only people that had like a moral compass, because even Amanda Waller, you know, as a character didn't necessarily have that. So when you're comparing those two characters, you know, same actor, I thought they did fine in the role. I liked the version of both of them, I think, in the new one.
I think the advantage with Flag in the Suicide Squad is he has a history with the characters outside of just Waller, right? He has a history with Quinn. He has a history with Boomerang, Captain Boomerang. He has a history with Bloodsport.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of that's important. We understand the dynamics in these interactions, and they come through better than in the first one, where literally he is just the stereotypical commando.
And I like that. I think it gives him a little bit more character, and it makes his, you know, the climax of his arc in the Suicide Squad much more dramatic. It was one of the highlights of the movie, I felt.
I would agree.
So that was well done. And then, yeah, as far as cast, there's, you know, a lot of other people. Boomerang, there's Pete Davidson. A lot of these guys, they're in there more so for name only. Their characters only appear, you know, in a very limited capacity. So as far as cast goes, if you look back, you know, you got the Will Smith character, you have Killer Croc, you have some of those other people.
Diablo.
It's really hard for me to pick which one was better.
I think the second one personally is better. I think, for one, I love John Cena as the Peacemaker, which is very different than the Peacemaker in the comics. He brings a great element to this kind of quirky dynamic that the Suicide Squad is anyway.
Yeah.
But the reason why I think James Gunn version is better is it's just bigger. We have more characters that we're exposed to. And part of it, I think what's so clever about the Suicide Squad is we're taking all these minor, very obscure characters from the DC universe, and we're putting them together and playing with this formula. And they really lean into that in this version. In fact, it's so much to the point that even in the background, right, we see Calendar Man, we see Kaleidoscope, these really minuscule minor characters, but they're there, which is great fan service. And if you're playing with all these, you know, supporting cast of supervillains, it's fun to see how far they're willing to go and who they're willing to wrangle in. And they do it great in this film.
So I do want to acknowledge, while we're discussing the cast, in the first version, we have the Joker. And in this version, we have no Joker. Now, for whatever it's worth, you know, that version of the Joker was, you know, kind of widely criticized and ridiculed. People that weren't a fan. But I will say, upon rewatching the 2016 version, Joker still scene stealer, man. You know, whenever he was on screen, his presence was known. You could not help but, you know, be intrigued by the Joker. And maybe to the film's detriment, he kind of overshadowed some stuff because his storyline is somewhat secondary to the overall arc of the story. But I mean, I still think upon rewatching it, he works.
I'm not as big a fan of the Leto version of the Joker, especially when you compare Leto in the Snyder Cut to Leto in the Suicide Squad. I thought that the Snyder Cut Leto was much more the creepy Joker character that we expected and didn't really get in this. However, in the defense of Jared Leto, because I've been talking smack about him for 5 years now, the disadvantage for the Joker in Suicide Squad is he leaves the movie halfway through. His arc is incomplete. And again, this is something that when we learn more about the Ayer cut, apparently Batman was supposed to have a bigger role in the film, and the Joker was supposed to have a bigger role in the film. Even in the concluding battle, the Joker was supposed to show up and be a part of it. So without that Joker, we are missing a big chunk of who this character is and where he's going, which is why, in my opinion, I think some of Leto's performance suffered. It's just incomplete.
Now, can I acknowledge something else I liked from the original that the new one doesn't really have, other than its connections to the first film, is the new one does have this sense of place within the overall DCEU at the time of its release, which I believe is after Batman vs. Superman, but before Justice League, correct?
Yes, because if I recall, Waller's directly talking about the death of Superman.
Right. And they do have one line in this one for Bloodsport where they say that he like shot Superman with like a kryptonite bullet or something.
Which is a throwback mostly to the comics.
Right. And it's never happened. We never saw it. So other than it just being kind of an aside, it's not actually playing into the larger universe. Whereas something I did enjoy upon rewatching, now that I've seen like the Snyder cut of Justice League and all this different stuff, is that the first Suicide Squad does feel like it has a place in the overall narrative and kind of belongs. I liked the additions of Batman and the Joker and the idea of making this feel bigger than it, like just this solo team up film. And that was fun. Especially going back. Yeah.
I agree.
I didn't realize it at the time when I saw it in theaters back in 2016, but upon rewatching it, I was like, I actually enjoyed those elements. Having Bruce Wayne, right? I think it's the end of Batman versus Superman, where Waller shows up and like the post-credits, they're connected.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels that way. It feels a little bit more like it has a place, where this one, the new one, feels a little bit more standalone. And while that does have its own benefits, because now it's not beholden to this extended universe that maybe isn't going anywhere, I kind of liked it. Feels like it belongs.
I agree. I thought the first one, what was really cool was, and Zack Snyder was on board as a producer. This was supposed to play into the greater Snyderverse. And I believe the original intent was the Suicide Squad was supposed to support the Justice League in their battle against Darkseid, 3 movies down the line, which probably aren't going to get made now.
No, it would have been cool though, to see it all kind of come together, coalesce in that way. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, this one kind of is missing that element, doesn't have it, and maybe to its benefit, because that extended universe really isn't going anywhere. Next, though, I want to talk a little bit about the visuals. So there's kind of a lot going on here, like in terms of, I think, the grading. The effects haven't really changed much. It's only been like 5 years in between movies.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like, what do you think? They're playing with different color palettes. They're doing, different effects type things.
Well, obviously, the Suicide Squad is really the perfect film created for James Gunn to just inject his style. And the recut of the original Suicide Squad was to try and replicate what James Gunn was bringing to it. So bringing him on board as a director was a great move to just really lean into what he does well in terms of his editing, the visual style of his films, the comedic timing. So the look of the second one really looks much more of that action comedy that I think Warner Brothers wanted out of the series. The first one, the grading is a little darker. It's much more of almost a Batman-inspired Dark Knight type look with lots of blues and blacks. And
like when the fire comes out in the first one, it feels like a breath of color.
Yeah.
Because it's so kind of grim. And
this one's in the jungle. It's on an island. They're on beaches. They're right. Like it's much lighter. In fact, there's sequences where the background is almost completely white during the rain battle at the end. Right.
Yeah. And then they're having fun with like different elements of like, even when the title comes up, it comes up like behind the characters. Yeah. And they're doing this thing in this movie where they have like the, how like sometimes a movie will say like 3 years later or whatever, 3 days earlier. They're actually like James Gunn is placing those kind of within the context of the world. Like on the beach, sticks will rearrange to say a message. Yeah. There's writing on a toilet seat, but that's just for us. The characters don't see it, but they're kind of just having fun with the visuals in a neat way. Mm-hmm. And it works. I mean, it kind of kept me engaged. I was always looking out for like, are they going to rearrange the clouds in the sky? Is there going to be something splattered in blood, which there was? Like, I think one of the characters gets his head blown off when he tries to escape, and then the blood, coalesces in the water, and it says like Warner Brothers presents or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think they were having a little bit of fun with that. It was pretty cool. I did like the color palette of the new one better. It's brighter, it's more fun, it's lighter. And I think it adds to the comedic elements that I think they were really trying to go for in this one. Now, when it comes to the comedy, did you think the movie was funny?
I thought that the second one was funnier than the first one. The first one, at times, I felt like they were trying too hard. The second one, some of the elements came together.
Yeah, there were some great bits in the second one that I did enjoy. Like, I loved the whole polka dot man and his mom backstory, and how visually that plays out. How they, kind of turn when you see things from his POV, like everyone is his mom. I thought that worked visually. That was a lot of fun. That was a cool gag. But I don't know. For me, the comedy didn't necessarily work for me. There was this overarching sense to me that they were doing a retread of just things that had done before, like witty banter. I was like, man, I mean, Josh Whedon has like done this. I don't know. Guardians has done this. It felt like a retread. And sometimes it was predictable to me. Like, I felt like some of the comedy, like a character would say a line and I'm like, I kind of know what somebody's going to say. It seemed, I don't know, it just seemed off. Didn't seem natural to me.
I mean, I don't think that there was anything different than the comedic attempt in the first one. I think in some ways it was just executed a little better. I think the other big difference is the Suicide Squad. Well, Suicide Squad is a PG-13 movie, and the Suicide Squad is rated R, and it allowed them to lean into the action, the violence, and the gore much more than they would in the first one.
And they do. I mean, we see people's heads get sliced off. We literally see people get ripped in half. A shark eats somebody. There's a lot of blood. People get shot. You think about some of the effects that we get with like Starro at the end.
Yeah.
It's pretty graphic. Even the idea of like these starfish like sticking to people's faces is pretty creepy.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, in my opinion, when they go for the gore, they shoot off like Pete Davidson's face and all this stuff. Like, it was played for laughs. I just didn't find it very funny.
I don't think it landed as well.
Like, it was supposed to be like this, like, surprise, and you're supposed to be like, oh my God, that's crazy. But I was like, I don't know. His face just got blown off. Like, they did the whole, like, the guy in the water, his head gets blown off, and then like a bird lands on him and starts eating the bits.
Yeah.
I just didn't find it very funny.
Or there's that other scene too, where I feel like they're trying a little hard, where Bloodsport and Peacemaker are trying to get more extreme kills.
Yeah.
As they're infiltrating the camp. And again, you're just almost like, I feel like you're trying really hard as a filmmaker.
Well, and there is a certain element to, that kind of morbid comedy where it's like, those are people.
Whereas at least in the first one, they're fighting those clay men.
Yeah. Like, they are still people and they're just being like blown up. I mean, kind of just for simply existing. And I don't know, that to me was a little, I just didn't find the humor in it per se. Because like, if you think about the new Suicide Squad, a lot of people die.
Oh yeah.
Like, Starro kills a ton of people. The Suicide Squad kills a ton of people. Like, there's a lot of death in that movie. And like I said, like, again, like King Shark, like, rips someone in half, but I'm kind of like, I don't know. It didn't capture my heart. I wasn't like, oh my God, I love this. I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure why this has to happen, but okay. So where I think another movie that kind of does the rated R thing a little bit better is something like Deadpool, where he's breaking the fourth wall and he's kind of telling us these are bad guys. And like, they're constantly having him personally get like his arms broken or his leg twisted around or something, and then he just fixes it. But I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of like overly romanticized gore and death.
Mhm.
It just feels like it doesn't carry the weight then. You know, almost like at the end when Starro releases all the starfish and they just start attaching to people. For the most part, you're like, I mean, I know these are citizens of Corto Maltese, but at the end of the day, they're ultimately just faceless people.
Well, I think the other problem they run into is since there are members of the suicides killed off in this film, the audience is so desensitized to death throughout the movie that it actually, I think, takes some of the weight out of their deaths out, right?
Yeah, the biggest one being like Polka Dot Man, which again is played for laughs at the end of the movie. Like Starro just steps on him and he's dead. And I don't know, like it was done for laughs. It wasn't done for anything other than a cheap laugh. And I don't know, I just didn't enjoy it. Didn't like it.
Fair enough. I agree.
Like he didn't have like his heroic moment, or he didn't, it's they're like, oh, you know, hey, that's what you expect. So we're just gonna, you know, kind of go against those expectations and just have him step on him because he was gonna die anyway. But I'm like, I don't know, it just felt cheap. You know, I felt like, you know, kind of a good example. And I always go back to Star Wars, but like in the sequel trilogy, I feel like they go for those a couple times, these kind of like cheap gag laughs. And it took me out of it more than made me laugh. Didn't really care for it.
Fair enough.
So, you know, comedy was a big factor. The R rating, the color palettes, the cast. You want to talk about the story?
Well, we have to talk about the story, and I think that's what we need to get now. I think that it's actually very weird how similar both stories are. Essentially, when you get down to brass tacks, the US government is doing bad stuff, messes up. They have to send in the Suicide Squad to save their butts and make sure that this, you know, their mistakes don't get out to the rest of the world. Amanda Waller is directly to blame in both incidents. And when we get there and the Suicide Squad is blown away that, in fact, Waller is behind this the whole time, they turn against her and do the quote unquote heroic thing to save, you know, the greater good.
Yeah. And I mean, essentially, the very idea of the Suicide Squad existing in both movies is why, like, I like that both movies are, the whole comic premise basically says that the Suicide Squad are the right people for this mission, because if they find out what the US government did, we can just kill them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Where if we send in the Avengers and they find out, they're going to be like, well, what the hell?
Yeah.
We can't just kill the Avengers. So then we got the Avengers coming after us.
Justice League, you're crossing Marvel and DC right now.
Yeah. But the Avengers would get it done. I don't know if Justice League, I don't know.
Oh. No, and so obviously both films are very similar from the perspective of what they're about. Now, when we get down to individual character arcs, I think it's interesting. I think that considering that Bloodsport and Deadshot are essentially identical characters with identical arcs, I actually think that the Idris Elba arc works better.
Okay.
And the part of it is, obviously he's looking for quote unquote redemption, but it's more than that. Waller talks about how she's going to turn Bloodsport into a leader. Yeah. And at the end of and he's like, no, I do my own thing. I don't want to be part of this team. I don't want to be part of this team. Yet at the end, as the leader of the team, he takes command, he embraces them, and he looks out for them. While Deadshot is looking for his own personal redemption and showing his daughter that he's a hero, it doesn't deliver in the same way as there's the scene at the end of the Suicide Squad where Bloodshot's daughter or Bloodsport's daughter is watching him on TV and says, that's my dad. He is a hero. Right. Yeah. I think that's a much more completed arc for the character.
And I mean, part of it is that they go back to the daughter. I mean, the thing is, like, it's a scene that feels a little shoehorned. You know what I mean? Like like, oh, I mean, what if she just like hadn't been watching TV, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's kind of convenient, but in essence, you know, they have this kind of big blow up at the beginning where she says he's not much of, you know, he's an embarrassment as a dad. And they get into this huge argument. He's like, I don't have any good in me, but constantly people are trying to pull out that good. And he has his kind of heroic moment where he's going to leave. He's going to be selfish and just walk away and be like, not my problem. Like, and instead he, turns around and is like, screw it. If they blow my head off with the little implant they put in me, then so be it. But we got to do the right thing at some point. And yeah, I think the payoff then is shown through his leadership at the end, because I think Waller makes a comment. She's like, I told you I would turn you into a leader, and with his daughter. And I don't think that you get those kind of, that kind of payoff for Deadshot's character. You just kind of see it and you're like, I don't know, it's all right.
He just decides he's going to take the heroic route, but we don't really know why. This character who talks about how he doesn't have sympathy, how, he's able to murder all these people and sleep well at night because he doesn't have a heart, suddenly has this mysterious change and is worried about the rest of the world and, these soldiers of the Enchantress and the first. I just don't think it's as powerful. I also think an important thing that James Gunn does is we already talked about changing Flag's character a little bit more. He's not just the soldier. He is the soldier with a conscience, and he's looking at what are the implications of his arc. I think that's much more important, or the implications of his action. I think that's much more important towards his arc. But I like the idea of King Shark and Ratcaller.
Okay.
They're softer characters than we have in the first Suicide Squad. Obviously, Diablo is trying to be there as this kind of moral character with a heart who's burdened by his actions of his past. But Ratcaller and King Shark are much softer. King Shark's there for comedy, but Ratcaller, her job is to bring humanity to the team. She brings humanity to the situations. She has the conscience. She is sympathetic, right? She's this person who her superpower is controlling rats because, she has a feeling for them, and she understands that even the smallest things still can have a purpose. And I think that's very important. And when she plays out with Peacemaker, with Bloodsport, with Flag, she forces them to face an element of humanity that the original Suicide Squad doesn't have to deal with.
Yeah, I think you're right. She's the character that literally, Peacemaker's like, well, this is what I was told to do. Well, she's like, but you don't have to.
Yeah, she foils everyone on the team for the most part.
Yeah, so she's that person that needs to be there to be like, hey, I mean, those are the orders, or this is what you selfishly want, but you can choose to do something else. You don't have to do this.
She also has faith and sees the good in every one of those characters, which is important because, again, most of the other Suicide Squad characters in the second one and in the first one seem to all believe that they are broken and beyond redemption.
Now that you bring that up, something I wanted to talk about, and this isn't a direct comparison between the Suicide Squad movies, but James Gunn movies. I feel like in the Suicide Squad, what James Gunn is trying to do is bring an element of the original Guardians of the Galaxy to the Suicide Squad, which is, these are villains without friends. And I think in Guardians of the Galaxy, they say they're losers without a family, right?
Yeah.
And I think Guardians works better because all the characters kind of play into this overall narrative of not having a family. And it pays off, right? Star-Lord lost his mom when he was a kid and was abducted by Ravagers, and he doesn't see them as family. Gamora's family is Thanos, and she hates her father. She was taken. We don't know that at the time, but she was taken as a child. Drax, his family had been murdered, and Raccoon was, Rocket was experimented on, and his only family is basically Groot, who for most of the movie, he won't acknowledge that way. Mm-hmm. But the way the movie plays out is, Groot sacrifices himself for the overall team, and Rocket is devastated. Drax is absolutely kind of distraught and has this rage about his family having been taken from him. And then you have Gamora and Star-Lord, who end up kind of forming a romantic kind of chemistry and like a love interest. It really coalesces when they come together that these, for all these characters, this is the family that they don't have. Mm-hmm. And in this movie, it villains without friends, at the end, Harley's like, I'll be your friend. It doesn't hit home the same for me. They tried to do it again. And I love what you said, Ratcaller and King Shark. she's kind of doing something there that I think works. But this overall, like, kind of unifying the team, I just didn't get that vibe. I didn't think it worked as well.
And I think part of it is the nature of these characters, right? For the most part, the Guardians are kind of more petty
They're
thief
goofy
type characters.
Yeah,
right?
they're like oafs.
Whereas the Suicide Squad, they go to great lengths to paint them as, you know, these sociopathic serial killers and how horrible they all are. So you're going to need a lot more than one movie for them to be redeemable and for them to grow and learn to start caring about and accepting other people, right? Like that's too far for anyone to walk in 2 hours.
Well, and I mean, in all fairness, right, as far as Harley Quinn's concerned, she's had a couple movies. Mm-hmm. And she does come around to the idea of like, oh, you know, I'll be your friend. But part of it, like the way the movie plays her character is I can't trust her. I don't know how genuine she is. Earlier in the movie, you know, some guy shows interest in her and they end up having sex. And then like immediately afterwards, she shoots him. I don't know, because
she's kind of unreliable.
So I was like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, you're saying that until this guy does something you don't like, and then you'll just like kill him.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was tough for me to get around that whole theme of, oh, they're all friends, especially when like there were double crosses and a lot of them got killed, you know, and I don't know. I didn't see like a whole lot of, you know, kind of like, I guess, sacrifice for your friends.
Again, the only time you really see it, I think, is between Bloodsport and Ratcaller. They both make the promise that, you know, he says, I'll get you out of here alive. And she says, no, I'm going to get you out of here alive. And before the final, you know, before the completion of the final battle, they both save each other's life.
Yeah.
And again, and I think part of it is because of the foil of their characters, we can see that growth.
And you
don't get it from anyone else.
Right. You don't get it from anyone else. Like, even when they're like, you know, quote unquote, the Suicide Squad, a team, even when they're all running from something, you're basically, in my mind, I'm thinking like, I don't know which one of them is going to die a gruesome death, but it just feels like they're all running in the same direction, but that they're not necessarily all together.
I mean, case in point, look at the first battle when they storm the beach, right? They're all in it for themselves, and that's why some of them die and some of them live. There's no cohesiveness. There's no sacrifice. And maybe James Gunn did that intentionally to illustrate, you know, that version of the Suicide Squad to the version of the Suicide Squad that we have in the final battle, right?
Yeah.
But I see your point, and I agree.
Because I look back at the first Suicide Squad, and I mean, I don't get that vibe either. They still seem somewhat selfish. I mean, they come together at the end, an acknowledgement that, you know, they should do something. But even that, like you said, you know, they are villains, so it's hard to redeem their characters in less than 2 hours.
And it just feels very forced in the first one, right? They're there, and essentially they're like, well, we're all in this together, so we might as well stick it out. And even though once they complete the objective, then they're like, well, you know, we really should go down and take on this super powerful witch and her super powerful brother who are, you know, opening portals to another dimension. Like, let's hell, like we got nothing better to do. And I just think that's kind of out of character and unearned in the story.
Yeah, I think that's the difference is, you know, in both the Suicide Squads, you know, they're attempting maybe to do something, but it doesn't quite feel earned the way it does in something maybe more like Guardians of the Galaxy. And that resonates with fans.
I think the Suicide Squad needs the death of Coulson moment, right?
Yeah, they need something to come together around.
Yeah, right. And they have that. They have this. We were individuals, and now we are rallied in the same mission. And that never happens in either of the two Suicide Squad films.
Yeah, and even like the new Suicide Squad, like literally when part of the squad gets killed, they're pretty dismissive of it. They're like, oh, I guess he's gone. You know, another one of us dead.
Yeah.
You know, very rarely are they like moved by a death or anything. Like, I think the movie hits it home when Milton dies.
Right.
they're like, who's Milton? You know, and it's played for laughs. Again, I really didn't find that gag funny per se in the moment. You know, she's like, who's Milton? And I was like, I know what you guys are going for, but you're playing it out way too long.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't need to be a 5-minute scene.
Yeah, it could have been like one line.
One line is good enough.
Funny. Yeah, I was like, you're really dragging this out. But they're hitting home that everybody was expendable and that they're really not like friends, which was weird because it would have been almost better if Milton had died and it had moved some of them. Where you have this guy who's not a villain, he just kind of like was with the group the whole time, but he kind of endeared himself to these villains. And then he passes and maybe they're like, we're kind of sad about this. Like Milton was cool.
Well, and I think from story point too, one of the problems I had with the Suicide Squad is they kill off a lot of members of the Suicide Squad. We already talked about this, but the problem is none of them die in sacrifice. At least in the first Suicide Squad, when Diablo dies, he is dying as an act of sacrifice for the rest of the team and for the mission.
Yeah.
And I think that's a stark contrast. We see what he's fighting, his death means something. Whereas the other ones seem to just die out of comedy.
Yeah, right? Like for a laugh. I don't know. Like even the movie itself made me think like Harley Quinn could die, which maybe that's what they were going for, is just like anybody could die. But if she did die, to be honest, I don't think I'd care.
Well, and I think the other, and when
maybe that hits home the Suicide Squad, both of them in general, is like if they died, I don't know that I care all that much.
Well, and you bring up a good point. And when I put on my producer's cap, it blows my mind because I'm like, why are you just going to be wasting characters that you've invested in? Some great actors in playing when you have the opportunity to bring them back. Like, why kill them off?
Yeah, I don't know. And like you said, I think there was this element of like, if we make anybody expendable, then it feels like anybody could go. Mm-hmm. But the problem was you didn't make me care enough about any of them to make me really care if they went.
Yeah.
The same, again, I keep comparing it to Guardians because it's like this team coming together, whatever. But like when Groot goes, it's sad.
Yeah.
You're like, no, like, and he's, like, this is the right thing to do. And I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And in this, you just don't get a moment like that. I think Milton, if the character had been done right, could have been this guy who's like not a villain. He's just their driver. But imagine him like having fun driving and doing all this stuff. And then like you get to this spot and Milton dies and they're all like, are you kidding me? And they have this self-realization that they actually do kind of care about each other. Maybe up to that point, it was superficial and they're joking around. And then you realize like, we really do care. Like after all that we've been through together, you're like, I do care if you die. I don't want you to die. Mm-hmm. But I never get that from them. And I never get that from the story. So it just feels like I said, like Polka Dot Man like sums it up. He just gets stepped on and they're kind of like, oh, well.
Yeah.
There goes another one.
Well, and I think that the scene where they go to the bar, I think that Gunn was trying to show this camaraderie between the team, but it doesn't play out. And part of it is because it's not like they're all there, socializing, getting together. Like, in fact, the bar scene in the first Suicide Squad is a much stronger come together as a team moment. Like they all, they take off their armor, they show who they are, they show their vulnerability, and they make the agreement like, we're going to stick this through to the end. The second one, I think
that's way more powerful.
Exactly. And the second one, Gunn's like, hey, let's get them together and we'll do. Oh, no, we won't. Instead, they'll go off and drink together or drink by themselves and dance alone. And it doesn't have that moment that I think that scene was supposed to bring, which is, hey, we're coming together as a team.
Yeah, there were elements even there. Like you have Bloodsport sitting at the bar by himself, kind of keeping an eye out. You have Polka Dot Man dancing over here. You have, King Shark's in the freaking van. He's not even out there. I don't know. Harley Quinn, they hadn't met up with her yet. She's not even there. So this isn't even like a come together. Like it's being played that way, but it didn't come off that way. I don't think it worked the way they were going for. But something else I wanted to ask you about before we kind of wrap it up on the story is the villains. So I think you have the Enchantress in the original Suicide Squad, and you have Sorrow the Conqueror in the new one. And what's interesting to me is they both seem to be somewhat motiveless villains. Like in terms of they just want something to like conquer, you know, like
Yeah.
want to take over. Like I didn't find either to be particularly thrilling. Although I will have to give the nod to Starro here because at least it was creative. You know, obviously he's a comic book character. He wasn't made for this movie, but he was different. It was creepy. It was kind of fun, you know, to see like some crazy, you know, guy. I think that played a little better. And then it's worth acknowledging that I think the true villain is really like, ironically, the US government, like Amanda Waller.
Yeah.
But that's the same in both movies. Like you said, they actually play out pretty similar. So I wanted to get your thoughts. What are your thoughts on the villains? Because this was a real drag on the first one.
I think that Enchantress is a more compelling character, right? There's more going on there, and especially the fact that she has this dynamic already with the Suicide Squad. Now, the problem is they don't lean into that as part of telling the story.
Yeah.
And because of that, she seems very kind of one-dimensional. I think that that is an element, and you know, maybe in the Ayer cut they explore it, worth exploring and really stretching out. So then we see who this villain is and what drives her and her relationship with Flag and all these things that they kind of just brush right over. I think Starro was an interesting choice. He's actually, if I recall correctly, I believe he is the first character that the villain that the Justice League teams up to fight.
I think you're right.
Like back in like the 50s or the 60s. And he's kind of like obscure and it's almost funny, but at the same time, the way that he is created in the comic books is he's so powerful that he is a force to be reckoned with. I also think it's interesting in the sense that he's a unique enough character and unpredictable enough that when you have 5 people on the ground fighting him, you're like, it's overwhelming. You're like, I don't know how they're going to beat this giant dude.
Yeah.
Versus the Enchantress, she has an army of blob men that are, you know, kind of the worst like zombie army around. Her motivation's not clear. She has this brother character who's super powerful. And again, we really don't know what drives him or what his powers are. They're never defined. At least the Starro character, we understand what he does and how he does it. So I'm with you. Starro does it better than Enchantress.
But I mean, Starro still to a certain extent, you know, he's kind of just like the big monster. I think they even make fun of it in the new one where someone says like it's a, what is it, like a kaiju.
And I think from a story perspective, I also think it's clever. And it's like, how are you going to beat this gigantic, massive starfish? You're going to get an army of the smallest rats you possibly can. And that's going to be the difference maker. Again, you're using the tools that you have by the characters that you have. And I thought it was an interesting approach to meeting, you know, instead of the Power Rangers model of like just team up and make a Megazord to take them on, you know, I thought that was an interesting approach.
Yeah. He's still a character though, to me, like he's kind of like motiveless. Like, they call him Starro the Conqueror, but like, I don't really know why he's conquering anything. I mean, maybe just to get bigger.
Well, and I thought it was weird too when before he dies, he says that line about I was happy just laying in space and staring at the stars. And my understanding of Starro, that's never how he was in the comic book. He always seemed very determined to conquer the world. So I thought that was I guess it's to add some sympathy or depth to the character. But again, I mean, it's a giant starfish, like spoiler, who spews little starfish to make an army of, you know, drones.
That's pretty similar to Enchantress. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Both of them, they were not strong villains to me. I don't know. There was something about the way they were portrayed that just kind of, you know, oh, I want to take over the world. Very, you know, stock.
Yeah.
Just kind of like we need a bad guy.
Yeah.
You know, and they never really dove into like who Starro was or why does he take over worlds or, you know, anything of that nature. And I mean, other than, like you said, sending out smaller starfish to like give himself like his own like drone army, essentially like he's just like a big monster. He just like knocks buildings over, but like he doesn't do a whole lot.
Yeah.
So he was more fun, I think, like visually appealing because Enchantress was just kind of like, you know, cloaked in like black smoke and you know, like that type of stuff. I was like, I don't know, that's not very interesting to watch. But Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't really thrilled with either of them, to be honest. We didn't get like a cool like a Loki or a Thanos or somebody that you're like, oh wow, that's really cool.
Well, and again, I think part of it is that neither of them have really defined powers of what they can do.
Yeah,
So it's kind of just they just do whatever. And I don't ever think that works out very well when you don't define
yeah.
the rules of your villains.
And I like villains that you know you want to have villains who are foils to your heroes, but villains who can be defeated nonetheless, not by the hero alone. Right?
Well,
The hero is the person who's empowered to do it in this moment. But like Starro is kind of a good example of like, right, the rats like come and run him over. But you kind of think like, what if she had died? What if she just wasn't there?
yeah.
Can you take him out? How do you take a? How do you
No, you bring up a good point.
like? Is that the only way? Like,
the
would a spear
perfect
through the eye
foil
do it?
to the Suicide Squad needs to be someone more like Thanos, disciplined and vision driven and motivated. So then all these kind of apathetical, like, I'm just here, so I got nothing better to do, characters actually have to line up against something that is their opposite, and neither of those villains shape out that way.
Yeah,
you
they
know
they just and it feels kind of like by the time you get to the end, we're kind of like because both are truly introduced in their physical form at the ends of the movies, and we haven't had this kind of back and forth with them throughout the movie. It feels like a formality that they're going to figure out how to beat him.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
And so, and because they don't have any motives, it doesn't the emotional weight, of seeing Starro defeated. You're not like, yes, you know, which is what you want.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm going to ask you the question now. James Gunn, David Ayer. If you had to pick to watch one again, which one are you going with?
The Ayer cut. No.
Well, that was going to be my answer.
um, you know, I think I have to give the nod to the second one, and it's more so just because I found it to be a little bit more fun, James Gunn's version. But I mean, when I look at the movies, James Gunn has done it better with Guardians, and it wasn't as easy of a decision as I thought it was going to be. My hopes were super high when the first Suicide Squad came out, and I was let down. So my opinion of the first one was actually pretty low, and I had reserved hopes for this one, knowing that James Gunn was stepping in here. DC was kind of giving him a little a little boost after what had happened from his past and getting fired from Marvel, that whole thing. So I thought, he might be able to really bring his A game to show what he can do. But I wasn't as impressed as I had hoped to be with the new one. I think I would just give it the nod simply because, like you said, I think the cast is slightly superior and I think the movie's more fun. And that's really it. If I had to give a nod to the other one, I really like its place in the DCEU. They do a couple things. Like you said, I think they come together as a team better. I like the sacrifice in the first one better. But another nod I wanted to give really quick before we head out is I think the second one also does a better job of having the characters use their inherent abilities versus in the first one. I think there's a lot more of just like gunfiring and punching, which isn't as exciting. That's why when, what's his name, Pyro or whatever, he makes his sacrifice. Diablo. It feels like it carries weight, not only emotionally, but physically, because he's, actually using some sort of powers. A lot of the characters that, you always want to see a scene like in Captain America Civil War when they're at the airport, everybody's fighting. They're all using their unique abilities to try to counter everybody else's unique abilities. And in the first one, I felt like the fighting style just didn't necessarily, it didn't do a lot for me. They were just punching a lot of the time.
Fair enough. I would agree.
So I like that too in the new one. I think they do a better job of trying to use everybody's abilities. But, again, it's close, but I'll give the nod to the new one, the Suicide Squad.
I'd go with the second one. And I think part of it is because DC apparently envisioned the original Suicide Squad as this James Gunn style comedy, action, quirkiness. And that's what they got when they brought James Gunn on. They got exactly what they were planning for. I think the other advantage is, unlike earlier films in the DCU, it seems like Warner Brother was very content to let him make the movie he wanted to make. They didn't treat Snyder that way. They didn't treat Ayer that way. And we see the results. I think when you let these directors make the movie, execute their vision, you get a better quality product than when you try and go in there and cut it up and change it into something else.
Fair enough.
I'm really excited, and I really hope we do get the Ayer cut, because if it's even in any way similar to what we got with the Snyder cut, it's going to really be this transformative experience. And I'm with you. I was really curious to see where they were going, bringing all these pieces together and assembling their universe.
Definitely.
Since we didn't get that, we got to go with what we did, and James Gunn did it well enough. It's a James Gunn movie, and that's what we went to see, and that's what we got.
Yeah, agreed. And just so our listeners know, there will be a movie remake time where we take a look at the theatrical Justice League versus the Snyder cut. We will get to that.
Oh, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, we might have to do that. Might be like a movie remake time special edition,
like 4-hour episode.
We'll get some, we'll have some breaks. We'll do the whole thing. It'll be great. But anyway, let us know who you think did it better. Hopefully you guys got a chance to check it out. It's on HBO Max. You can watch it if you have HBO Max for free, or you can go to the theater if you want to head out and enjoy it on the big screen. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate you guys listening to the show. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to keep it going on social media and on our YouTube channel, where you can subscribe and follow along, help us rank a little bit higher. You can also go to Google and you can type in Filmmakers Compass Podcast. It'll pull up our website, has links to everything you need on there. So other than that, you can follow me at Big Kid D-Man and CP at NDCal5. CP, go ahead and take us out.
Thanks for sticking around and listening to us this week. We hope that you enjoyed the movies, and be sure to tune in next week when we're back for another comparison of Movie Remake Time. See you next week.